What do you think the major changes have been in the last 10 years?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because the last 10 years have been incredible. There's been incredible speed and, let's say, impact of change. If you think about what the fashion industry was 10 to 12 years ago, we had fashion weeks, which were central. You had fashion shows, which determined the seasonal demand. Fashion shows from the luxury industry were copied in the fast fashion industry, in the high street retailers. So it was a very straightforward model which evolved around a very clear seasonality. There was top-down communication. You would have like the designer who would come up with a collection with an idea of communication to the target group, and that would be multiplied through traditional media. And then basically sales would come from owned retail networks and wholesale network that basically would work for smaller brands. And this was how the industry worked. And this has been totally and utterly disrupted. It doesn't work that way anymore. Seasonalities are not the way that the fashion production cycle works. There are many more touch points with the consumer along the year, and the whole, let's say, communication model in parallel to the rise of social media and of course digital communication has been becoming ever more important, and then traditional fashion publications such as Vogue, Condé Nast, for instance, as the biggest publishing group, steep decline. Their role has been called into question. It's not central anymore. The big influencers are really the ones who call the shots, and the fashion industry has reorganized its communication assets accordingly, and also has internalized a lot of the communication that normally the publication industry did. And this means that if you have the means to become a publishing company yourself as a fashion brand, that means you're able to set the trends, you're able to intersect and to interact with the right individuals who will then endorse your product and bring your product into specific target groups. So you can really orchestrate, together with many decentralized influencers, a very specific and vertical communication strategy that you can then, on the other hand, serve directly with means of basically serving the demand. Therefore, a direct-to-consumer has been increasingly important, not only through traditional retail network, which is still very important for the big brands, but also by digital means, digital sales. That means e-commerce, means selling through digital marketplaces. It means many ways of serving the consumer online, serving the consumer maybe also through personal salespeople who reach out through WhatsApp, reach out through calls, through Zoom calls. This has been increased in the pandemic, particularly. Everybody talks about it, and this happens with the final consumer. It also happens in the wholesale distribution model. And therefore, if you look back 10 years, then you would take a person from 10 years ago and move them into our current situation, they would probably recognize only 30% of what existed back then. So it has been dramatic, it has been impactful, and has been changing I would say, the equilibrium within the industry and the power relationship among players.
So you're talking about a major shift in the way fashion companies do business and reach success now. So what do you think are the skills that are more in demand or required nowadays to be successful in fashion companies?
That's also a very good question, because it has changed. And let me take a step back, because I think in order to be able to say what skills are important, you have to understand the success factors driving the balance sheets of the important players, and who is winning in the market and who's losing. And according to that, you can then say what skills are necessary to enact those successful success factors, those drivers of business success. And what we've seen is that fashion players, along with the big conglomerates, big French conglomerates, and specifically, has been professionalizing a lot. There's much more managerial know-how in these companies. As I said, communication has been internalized, digital distribution has been internalized, physical distribution tends to be, the tendency is to try to control these channels as much as possible, because in this chaotic world where you have so many potential touch points, you have to be extremely careful what you communicate and how you interact with the consumer, and you have to control all those touch points. Back in the, let's say, in the 80s, you would have trusted shopkeepers who would represent your brand, and that would be sufficient. Now you basically really have to try to control all of this. And they say that Mr. Arnault, who's actually the most powerful person in the fashion industry worldwide because he's the owner of LVMH, the Louis Vuitton and Moët Hennessy fashion group, which is valued north of $240 billion, and is one of the richest men on earth, is basically a control maniac. He's not a Giorgio Armani, he's not a designer, he's somebody who really takes meticulous care that his organization, his chief executives per brand, his whole organization is meticulous, is really professional in everything. You know, if you decide that your image has to be declined in a certain way, that has to be followed religiously by everybody in the organization. And this is something that typically doesn't work for organizations driven by creative minds. Normally there you have a creative person, and then you have salespeople, you have marketing people, you have production people, and that's it. And this new organization is much closer to what a traditional multinational would have been. It's closer to Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola than it would have been to maybe Andy Warhol's atelier in New York City back in the 70s. So this has been the shift. There's been a huge change. And this means that all the skills that help companies enact this shift are actually the ones that are in demand. So yes, you have corporate functions, managerial functions, people who have gone to business schools and who've done traditional, education like that would have brought you to McKinsey or Bain & Company or Goldman Sachs back in the day when, in the roaring 80s on Wall Street. Those functions are necessary, but then there's many specific functions for people to make this technological machine that nowadays is necessary to make fashion companies and luxury companies profitable and make them thrive, are in demand because they're the ones who help this business model evolve, and it is continuously changing. Like the digital arena is changing. Some technologies are more mature, like e-commerce. Some technologies are more recent, like social media interaction on TikTok, for instance, and all the means to control this and to drive this. And therefore, I would say everything that is content production, monitoring of metrics, a mix of analytical skills and driving merchandising, online interaction, user experience, how to basically drive interaction with the consumer across touch points, across digital and physical, reap the synergies between the physical world and the digital world, and actually to be able to enact a completely new enterprise. I think this is strategic. This is up and coming, and I also think that the business model, as the French conglomerates, the dominant forces in the market, who are actually crowding out the competitors, and the Italian companies have a hard time catching up with them. CEOs are telling me that actually the French are basically, and Richemont, so also the big Swiss player, they basically occupy all the main locations in the big shopping malls where like Asian consumers shop. And they crowd out the smaller brands. So this is a danger for smaller companies, where basically all of the Italian biggest part of the fashion companies in Italy stem from those smaller players, are those smaller players. But on the other hand, I think that even the French are slow in their adaptation. So probably I see a new model emerging, a new model where digital skills have to be represented at the upper echelons of the organization. It's not necessary, it's not sufficient anymore to be a good wholesale salesperson, to be a good person, being able to sell in the physical store. That's also important, but it's even more important to be able to allocate stock across channels, to optimize your communication mix, find the right communication strategy with explosive profiles of influencers and celebrities and creators and the creative economy, who are able to propel your brand into relevance in the shortest of times, and they can also destroy your brand in a similar short period of time. So you have to be able to generate demand brilliantly by interacting with all the forces on the marketing side. And on the other hand, you have to be able to serve demand through all new means and to coordinate these means. And that means you have to bring managerial skills together with technological skills, understand both, and this is the difficult part, use this with empathy, use this with the creative passion that is the driving force of the fashion industry, which is a humanistic mindset. It's not a mechanicistic mindset. You can't be an engineer and be only an engineer and be successful in fashion, but you should be kind of a fashion engineer tomorrow, because you should have the skill which is a soft skill, to combine the understanding and the feeling and the empathy for what makes the dream work for the consumer with the very technical aspects and processes of serving that consumer in a very empathic way again. So you actually don't look like a technology company because you're very creative when you generate the product and the communication. You're very empathic when you serve the consumer, but everything in between is very technological. And therefore, if you're able to speak both languages, then I would say that your road to the top in the industry is paved. Yeah, that's a difficult question, but and probably it's hard to look into the future and have a clear understanding. It's impossible, obviously, but I would say that there's some technologies who are mature and that are there to stay, or at least they're not evolving as quickly as they did in the past. I very much believe in the model of there's a model of innovation that goes in phases, right? So there's jumps, and then there's stability, relative stability, and there's another jump. And I think that basically in the terms of how does e-commerce work, how do basic tasks of data analysis work, let's say the basics of how it works today, I think that's there to stay. I don't think that will change radically. I don't think we will have I'm not seeing big changes in devices nowadays. We have newer version of smartphones, but basically the revolution with the iPhone for the moment is there to stay. I'm not seeing holograms in the room, right? So yes, we're talking about the metaverse, but that's early days. So let's see how that evolves. It's not been evolving as quickly as we thought. On the other hand, I think what's really crucial is how to use data up to versions of artificial intelligence, where you can automatically read things out of vast amount of data that you wouldn't have been able in the past. So I think everything that uses data, operationalizes it, translates it into action, then goes back and tries to fine tune findings and actions, and then do that loop again. So testing and doing things better based on data, and maybe also automatizing that cycle with artificial intelligence. That's probably very hot right now. It's very powerful. It's also partially dangerous because we don't know what might happen by itself in that world. But I think tasks that today are still done by people are going to be transferred over to machine intelligence. And I think that the things that will never change, though, is the genius that you need to interact and to create a dream for consumers, and to enact that dream in a way that is authentic and that resonates across cultures, that you translate that into cultures. I think fashion industry is a cultural industry. You need cultural skills, you need cultural studies, you need cultural sensitivity, and that's not technological by itself, but it has to be brought together with technology. And I think technology can only partially and very incompletely understand culture. So I think things that technology does by itself probably will work more automatically. It will be cheaper, will be more available. Software that cost millions now costs hundreds of thousands of euro. Possible that it will cost tens of thousands of euro, maybe will be even for free. So I think technology will be ubiquitous, will be easy to use, but again, if you use the wrong cultural codes, if you're not able to deal with the power that you're handed by these technologies, I think that's the real skill, and that's in fashion, that's crucial. and therefore I would say yes, you have to learn your trade craft. Yes, you have to know how CRM works. It's very important. Customer data platforms, all forms of orchestrating e-commerce nationally, internationally, with omni-channel, with physical capabilities, with marketplaces. That's very important. Those are technologies. You have to work with Amazon. You have to work with the big marketplaces, how they work, how to interact, how to build a connection, all the tools that you need to build this value chain until the product reaches the consumer, how to handle returns. So that's huge. It's a huge technological and logistical challenge, and it's evolving, and it's getting, it's being perfected, but we're not there yet. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of profit in there. So yes, so these technologies are important, but again, I think even more important, I believe in the fact that the business models that we will see tomorrow are probably not the business model that you see in LVMH today, that you don't see in the most successful players today, but you will need huge investment to make these things happen. So we have Shane, which disrupted Zara. This just happened. If you think at the Zara business model, which is still very strong, it's a company doing above 20 billion in turnover a year, so it's a dominant force in European fast fashion. But Shane has been their main adversary and has been, taking innovation leadership away from them. And we haven't seen this in the luxury space yet, I may say, because I think that the LVMH model, taken the luxury world with all the pampering and looking after the consumer that it entails, is basically a upscale version of the Zara business model. So I'm really curious to see if we will see a Shane equivalent that will attack LVMH and take its predominance away, and that will be a very exciting world.